So almost everyone gathers again in Valinor, and it's still dark, but at least they can see the stars again, because Manwë drove away all of the evil vapors that Ungoliant was expelling. Yavanna sees that her beloved trees are dead, and she says to the Valar, I can't make them again on my own, but Fëanor captured the light of the trees in the Silmarils, so if I had just a little bit of that light, I could remake the trees. So Manwë's like, well, Fëanor? And Fëanor just stands there in silence, and Tulkas is like, what are you waiting for? Are you going to deny Yavanna the light that she made in the first place? But Aule is like, chill, this is a big thing we're asking. So Fëanor finally speaks, and he says, okay, yeah, I could break the Silmarils, but I would never be able to make them again, and I would die of heartbreak. I would be the first elf to die. His mother doesn't count, I guess, because the circumstances of her death were different. I don't know. Regardless, Mandos just says, not the first. And everyone's not sure what to say to that, so everyone just stands around awkwardly until Nienna sits down on the mound where the trees were and begins to wash away all of Ungoliant's filth with her tears. Then messengers arrive from Fëanor's house, and they bring awful news. Melkor came there, Finwë is dead, and the Silmarils are gone. As you would expect, Fëanor is positively enraged, and he there names Melkor Morgoth, Black Enemy of the World. He immediately leaves in a rage, and Yavanna starts weeping as well, thinking that now the last light of the trees will be swallowed up by darkness and lost forever. Meanwhile, Morgoth and Ungoliant escape to Middle-earth, and although Morgoth tries to escape Ungoliant, he can't, and she's like, alright sucker, time to pay up. And he's like, you're still hungry, you fatty? I don't owe you anything. But she's like, yeah you do, give me all those jewels you stole. So he reluctantly gives her a bunch of gems that he took from Fëanor's house, but he's still hiding the Silmarils behind his back. And she's like, I know you have something behind your back, give it to me. But he refuses. So she wraps him up in this giant web and makes him scream so loud that his voice never stopped echoing off the mountains, and it could be heard all over Middle-earth. Now when the Valar had first captured Morgoth, they didn't fully search all of his fortress and find all of the black evil stuff that he had made. So there were a bunch of Balrogs hiding down there, and upon hearing the cry of their master, they come to his aid and drive off Ungoliant. She runs off and dwells in a land which became known as the Valley of Dreadful Death, and has a bunch of disgusting offspring, and nobody knows what happened to her in the end, although some say that she finally devoured herself. So the Silmarils stayed in Morgoth's possession, and he went his Balrogs to the ruins of his fortress Angband, and he began to rebuild it, raising huge mountains around it. There he continues his work, multiplying his orcs and making all kinds of other nasty stuff. He makes a crown and sets the Silmarils in it, calling himself the King of the World. The Silmarils had burnt his hands forever, and he was never free of their pain, and the weight of his crown eventually became almost unbearable. But so he remained, never coming out from the pits of his fortress, festering his hatred and sending forth his evil spirits into his servants to do his bidding. Meanwhile, back in Aman, all of the Noldor go back to Tirion, and Fëanor has everyone assembled beneath the high court of the king. He declares himself king of the Noldor now that Finwë is dead, and then speaks to all of them, talking trash about the Valar and urging everyone to follow him to Middle-earth in pursuit of Morgoth. Then he and all 7 of his sons swear a terrible oath, an unbreakable one that no one should ever take, swearing by Iluvatar himself. They swore to pursue with vengeance and hatred to the ends of the world any Vala, demon, elf, or man, or any creature, great or small, good or evil, that will ever exist if they would withhold from them a Silmaril. So now the Noldor are pretty freaked out, and Fingolfin and Turgon, his son, are like, what the heck are you doing? This is insane. And everyone just starts screaming at each other, but Finarfin and his son Orodroth are like, hey, can we all just calm down for a second? But after a raging debate, Fëanor finally wins out, and the majority of the Noldor agree to follow him, although no one else swore the oath that Fëanor and his sons had taken. Finarfin tries to convince everyone to wait, but nobody listens to him, and they all start getting ready to leave at once. However, even though the Noldor agree with Fëanor, they're pretty reluctant to call him king, favoring Fingolfin instead. So even though Fëanor and his sons and the elves who followed him are in the lead, the greater part of the Noldor are in the back with Fingolfin. Fingolfin really didn't want to go at first, but his son Fingon urged him on, and he was also very reluctant to leave all the Noldor to Fëanor's leadership. He also remembered how he had explicitly said, I'll follow you wherever you go, so it'd be kinda dumb if he didn't. Finarfin comes too, although he really doesn't want to, and ultimately only a small fraction of the Noldor remain in Tirion. Just as the elves are setting out, a messenger from Manwë comes, and he says, the Valar won't stop you, but seriously, don't go. Also, you're stupid for swearing that oath, Fëanor, and literally nothing good will come of this. There is no way you can beat Morgoth. But Fëanor just laughs, and he's like, yeah, well, at least I'm actually doing something, and the Valar will be shocked to see how much damage I do to Morgoth. Now beat it. So the messenger leaves, and the Noldor set off in earnest, some of them much more willing than others. As Fëanor is leading them, he finally starts thinking, and he realizes that there's no way he can get all the elves to Middle-earth without a lot of ships, and none of the Noldor know how to build ships. So he goes to the Teleri and he's like, hey guys, come join in my epic quest and please lend us your ships. But the Teleri are not that impressed, and they try to convince the Noldor to stay. Olwe, the king, is like, hey buddy, listen, we know stuff is bad, but the Valar will take care of this. Everything's gonna be fine. But now Fëanor is mad, and he's like, well then I guess we're not friends anymore, although you pack of slackers were awful quick to ask for our help when you got here and we built all your houses for you. Olwe is just like, dude, chill, we're still friends. We're just trying to convince you not to make a stupid decision. And also, our ships are as important to us as your jewels, and you can't have them. So Fëanor goes off and sulks for a while, and once he thinks he has enough people, he goes and tries to straight up steal the ships. The Teleri naturally try to stop him, and they start shoving the Noldor into the ocean, but then the Noldor draw their swords and a battle breaks out. The Teleri have the upper hand at first, but then Fingon and some others of Fingolfin's people show up, and all they know is that their kinsmen are being attacked, so they boost the Noldor, and eventually the Teleri are overcome. The slaughter of the Teleri is basically the original sin of the Noldor, and it haunted them forever after. Ase and Uinen are both furious about this, and the sea lashes out against the Noldor, and a lot of them drowned and were shipwrecked, but the majority of them made it, and they continued on northward, some by ship and some by land. Suddenly a dark figure appears before them, which some say was Mandos himself, and he there pronounced the doom of the Noldor. He declared Valinor shut off to them, and that they would receive no help from the Valar in their fruitless battle against Morgoth. In the end, no matter how they may try, the oath that they swore and the blood that they shed would foil all of their plans. Many of the Noldor were afraid, but Fëanor is, unfortunately, still Fëanor, and he refused to repent and continued onward. But Finarfin had had enough, and he turned back, taking some of the Noldor with him and winning the pardon of the Valar. He became High King of the Noldor and Amon, but all of his children still remained with Fingolfin's people, who also chose to continue. The Noldor came farther north up to a narrow strait which connected Amon to Middle-earth. However, this strait was made up of treacherous icy mountains which the elves were not thrilled about crossing. So Fëanor talks with his sons, and they decide the only way they can get across is with the ships, but there are a lot of elves and not enough ships to take them, because nobody trusted each other anymore, and nobody wanted to stay behind and wait for the ships to ferry them across. So finally, Fëanor and his sons decide to sneak away with the group of elves most loyal to them, and they abandon the rest in the barren wasteland. After they land, Maithros, Fëanor's oldest son, isn't all bad, and he used to be pretty good friends with Fingon, so he's like, hey dad, we're gonna go get everyone else now, right? But Fëanor just starts cackling, he's like, nope.
Burn the ships, cut the ties, send a flare into the night.
And after his sons stop being weirded out by their dad's random singing, they do as he says, except for Maithros, who really isn't cool with it. So now back on the other shore, Fingolfin and the others see the light from the burning ships, and they realize that Fëanor literally left all of them behind. So now Fingolfin is furious and more determined than ever to make it to Middle-earth. Having no other options, they choose to cross the Hills of Ice. Many elves die along the way, including Turgon's wife, but eventually they make it and stand once again on the shores of Middle-earth. So while all of that was happening over in Valinor, the Sindar have been living it up over here in Middle-earth. Thingol and Melian are basically the rulers of all Beleriand, and they give birth to their daughter Luthien, and everyone is so happy. During this time, the dwarves wake up and come over the mountains into Beleriand, and the elves are really surprised because they're like, we thought we were the only sentient creatures. But after overcoming some language barriers, they set up a healthy trade relationship with the dwarves. They were never buddy-buddy with each other, but they helped each other out and it was all good. After a while, though, the dwarves start bringing news of all these evil things out in the wild, so Thingol decides to start planning ahead, and he asks the dwarves to build a palace for him. The dwarves agree and work along with the elves to build Menegroth, the Thousand Caves, and one of the greatest dwellings of the elves in Beleriand. The dwarves also set to work forging armor and weapons, and Thingol stored them all up for later. He didn't need them at first because for many, many years everything was awesome in Beleriand, but then Morgoth destroyed the trees and fled back to Middle-earth, and Ungoliant went ravaging about, so pretty soon everybody saw that stuff was going to be real different. Morgoth sends an army of orcs to Menegroth, but with the help of some other Sindar from a different region, Thingol and his guys and the dwarves all fight them off. But the orcs were somewhat victorious, and they cause a lot of trouble for Círdan and his people, so Thingol clusters all of his elves into the heart of a forested area that's almost the center of Beleriand. Melian then uses her Maya powers to create what is called the Girdle of Melian, a wall of shadow that surrounded the forest so that no one could enter against the will of either her or Thingol. Because of that, the land became known as Doriath, which is Land of the Fence. Fëanor and his crew have since arrived, but we won't be getting back to them just yet because we have to cover some other things first.